This is Two Guys and a Mic. It is a brand new podcast. My name is Jim Ryan, and this guy is
Mark Rizzo.
yes. We're friends for a long time, but we both have a lot of experience in the music world. Mine from the radio side, Mark from the record label side, and we thought we'd do a podcast called Two Guys and a Mic and share some of the funny stories that have happened to us, some of the interesting things that have happened to us in the radio record business over well, if you combine it, about 70 years of experience. So you could say, we're well seasoned.
You don't
Not
look a
quite
day
as
over
much,
70.
not as quite as seasoned as our presidential candidates. I mean, I think they're beyond seasoned, but we won't go there. But we're going to get into the music business and discuss some interesting things that have happened to us in our careers. We may even be having guests stop by from time to time, right?
Yeah, we've got a whole bunch of guests lined up. I think I sent you the list of people we're going to be getting on the list. I told you everything from Stormy Daniels speaking about our political.
Which
Um,
I was quite surprised you were able to find and contact her and bring her in. I have no idea what we're going to ask her, but you can prepare those questions.
I'm going to spend some private time with her and get all the information we need about her musical selections, her choices, and
I'm
how
sure
she
you
feels
will.
about what you and I do for a living.
Yeah, I'm sure. I'm sure it'll be a riveting conversation. Who else? Who else are we thinking?
I don't know. I mean, we do have our friends and some professionals as we'll toss their names out as we started discussions. People that gave me my start, some people that started and worked with you, and people we've met along the way, as well as some artists, some people who we've been responsible for somewhat of their success, and some anecdotes in between all of that.
And just to give you some background, my first time ever cracking a mic, as they say in radio, was when I was in high school. And I went to high school down in Florida, where I currently live, but on the other side of the state. And my mother worked at a bank, and I'd always expressed interest in being in radio. Well, turns out one of her clients that came to the bank did mornings at the station she used to listen to all the time, which I kind of dubbed music for the afterlife,
Mhm.
because it was very mellow and laid back and not the kind of stuff that I would listen to. But it did help open a door for me because the guy was like, "Oh, that's interesting. Well, I'll have him come by sometime and I'll show him around the station and he can see what goes on." And that ended up leading into as many times as I could get there because I couldn't drive at the time by myself. I had a permit, but I couldn't drive by myself. You had to have a licensed driver above the age of 18 with you. So anytime I could get there, I would get there and get to hang out. And I got to know everybody that worked there. And eventually that worked into a part-time job for me, running Sunday morning programming, but it ended up being like a late night pinch hit thing one night when the overnight guy called the program director, I guess, sick at the very last minute, and he had nobody and he didn't want to go in. So he figured he'd call me and asked me if I would go in. And we used to run everything. It was like a live assist station, but all the music was on these giant reel to reel tapes. You remember, reel to
Sure.
reel tape?
Wow.
And you had to change those pretty much every 2 hours. And you had two machines. So, as one was winding down, you get the next one ready to go, and then it would go. You had to fire that. But long story short, he needed someone to do that in the middle of the night. And you had to back time to national news at the top of every hour, which I had learned from the guys on how to do that, watching them and observing them. So I knew how to do it and execute it. But you also got to do the weather once an hour. And the guy actually let me go on and do the weather um, once an hour. And it was basically like a forecast. I don't know. I can't remember exactly who sponsored it or something, but it was someone, and you would read the forecast and give the temperature, and you had to use the word degrees. Now nobody says degrees, but you had to say 71 degrees, whatever it was, and did that once an hour. And that became a part-time job. After doing that one little fill-in, the part-time job basically was running stuff on Sunday mornings, but I would go during the week a couple times, and I kind of was like, let's call it a producer for whoever was on the air. It helped, because back then they weren't even using carts, they were actually using records. So you had the huge record library, and you
Um,
had to pull from the library what, the records every hour to play, or the
hmm,
45s, depending on what it was on.
wow.
So that's how it all
But
started really for me before I hit
so,
the age of 16.
so was your mom able to tell you that he had a lot of money in the bank and this was a job you should have go after?
No, she didn't tell me anything like that. She didn't. I have no idea if she would ever kind of share that information. But she didn't try to discourage my dreams of doing it. You know, she didn't try to say, "Oh, you don't want to do that because he doesn't make any money." You know, I think it.
Well, that's interesting.
That was not
Well,
something she was going to do. What
well,
about you? What was your start?
we'll get into if people can still do that nowadays, because as you said, you got a local break and they were able to bring you in and you were able to learn stuff that nowadays I don't think is possible. And as far as my start, I had applied because I wanted to work at a record company. I didn't really know what it was. I just thought it'd be kind of cool. You work with a bunch of records and with artists, and I didn't really know all the different departments. But I was applying also at television stations and HBO and Showtime and everything. But I applied to all the record labels, and back then in the 80s, there were a lot of record labels, as there were probably a lot of privately owned radio stations. And I would do the generic, send out a resume and cover letter in a stamped envelope and type it all up and bring it to the mailbox. And I did it week after week after week. In fact, I had quite a collection of the generic automated, responses back. But one day I got a call, and it was from A&M Records, and it was in Manhattan at 595 Madison Avenue, and they asked me if I was interested in applying for the mailroom position. And who was I to say no? I figured, sure, I'll put a foot in the door. And I think I told the story to people that they were impressed that I came wearing a suit, which I didn't think I really needed to do. But my girlfriend, who later became my wife, you better wear a suit. And it's not something I was going for a mailroom job, but I wore a suit, and she hired me on the spot because I was wearing a suit.
Like the
So,
Michael J. Fox Secret of My Success movie.
well, that's what you said, yeah, but it wasn't
Yeah.
quite like that. I did work in the mailroom, and I became a messenger, and I was part of the mailroom stuff because, as you said, with all the vinyl and records, there was a mailroom that was from floor to ceiling with vinyl, and it was like I'm in a record store, basically, not only a record company. And it was great. So we packaged up these vinyl records, and I would hand deliver them wherever they had to go. They would go into radio stations or publicists, or I think Rolling Stone had an office, and we used to bring vinyl to them. So it was a mailroom slash messenger job. That's what got my foot in the door. Which, as I started to say, I don't know if people would be able to start at a record company like that nowadays, because there's not that many record labels. I mean, back in the day, as I said, there might have been 11 or 12 or 13 record labels that were sending
Hmm.
stuff to. Now there's such big, you know, I should say conglomerates, kind of like with the radio stations being Odyssey or iHeart or Town Square or anything else. Nowadays, it's either Universal or Sony, basically.
Yeah. Plus, it's the technology is different, right? You don't have the vinyl or the CD anymore. Everything's digitally delivered
I don't think they
via a
mail them.
download.
I
So
don't
you
think there
don't
are
even,
mailrooms.
yeah, interesting.
Crazy. Yeah.
So
So,
did you actually deliver records to radio stations, or was that basically the job of the promotion people?
well, the promotion people would do mass mailings. I think the local stations in New York that I would deliver stuff to, I don't think I was bringing anything to WPLJ in a day, but I do think I dropped some stuff off at a couple of radio stations, but I don't remember what they were. And if it was a far messenger job, I would give it to the other guy. I didn't want to take trains. I didn't want to go beyond 50th Street. In those days, I think we were on like 57th Street. And the other guy that worked in Maryland, he loved these long things because he'd smoke a joint and he'd be high and he'd take like an hour and a half before he came back. But we'd send
So
him
you
anything,
wanted
even
nothing but
everywhere.
local stuff.
I just wanted like between 4 or 5 blocks, I was good. Okay.
Did you vision back then that you wanted to end up doing record promotion? Or when you got in there, what part of the business excited you more? Because I think if I was doing that, A&R would excite me more.
Well, I got to learn what all the different departments were because I would see all the stuff that they were doing. I would deliver the mail in the company as well. I'd put stuff in their mailbox and do things for them. And there
Yeah.
was a publicity department, there was an A&R department, there was a promotion department. And the promotion department seemed to have the most action. It had the most excitement. And I think when we said of people and guests we may have, we may hire, we may have the man that hired me at A&M Records and got me into the promotion department. His name is Rick Stone, but back then it was also run by a guy named Charlie Miner. And if you do your research and know who Charlie Miner was, he was probably the number one promotion man ever. And sadly, we'll get into his story, but there was a lot
Some
of
good
energy.
stories.
There was a
Some
lot of
funny,
energy,
funny stories.
but obviously a sad ending as he did pass away, sadly.
Yeah.
But there was a lot of energy and excitement, and those guys seemed to be making the most money too. And from the stories I heard, Charlie Miner was driving a Rolls Royce. I didn't see anybody in the publicity department driving a Rolls Royce, so that was something. This may be interesting.
I've also been informed by friends of the show that you need to master the word allegedly when we start telling stories so we don't get
Yes,
ourselves in any trouble. We can say
we won't,
allegedly.
and we won't give specific names on some of the artists that may not have
Right.
been as fun and friendly as we would like.
I think a lot of times that's, and we'll touch on this more, but a lot of times, artists are human. They have reactions. I mean, I guess if you and I got asked the same thing over and over and over again, it would start to, kind of wear on you. But yeah, and you can lose sight of the fact that um, someone may be hearing this for the first time. You may have told the story 1,000 times, but somebody is hearing it for the first time. And, they want to be excited by it. They don't want an attitude, but, everybody's human. Things happen.
Oh
We
yeah,
might
I
have caught
mean,
people on a bad day, and that's
exactly.
why we should give the caveat when we talk about allegedly, or I don't know, maybe it was a bad day for so and so, so
Exactly.
we'll
Because,
work on that.
and also
Eh,
when you're dealing with the public, they're not always the nicest. And sometimes, you know, how they approach, let's say, the person that they're meeting can also
yeah.
set the stage for the reaction from the artists themselves. But I'm just talking about artists that we had to work with that may not have been as nice to us or as cooperative in getting our job done.
So it is called Two Guys and a Mic, Music and More. I'm Jim Ryan. He is Mark Rizzo. Like the podcast, hit the bell, subscribe. That'll keep us coming back with more of these and hopefully a bunch of guests and maybe some prizes. I know Mark's working on prizes.
Well, let me be the first to say we will be giving away a car. I spoke to
Oh,
Oprah. I know how they do it. And maybe we'll give away several cars. Maybe we'll have Oprah come on and she'll give us a car. Who
oh,
knows? But as long as we toss it out there, it'll bring people to this.
these
Because
cars
what
come
has
from the
been said and
Matchbox
done.
Company?
I didn't say what size car or what kind of
Okay,
car. I just said the word car. But
got
that
it.
being said, I think as we get into this, people will find it interesting and fascinating. And as I said, or I have said to people, the number one thing I think in America that people are obsessed with is fame. And when
Yeah.
you associate it with now on your side of the microphone, as we say, you've had the opportunity to interview people and you've seen them on the way up and perhaps on the way down. And on my side of the microphone, I've had to work with records and careers that start out in the bottom and go to the top. And then sometimes artists that don't make it, and there's all kinds of political reasons or circumstance. And, we can talk about songs that could have been hits that weren't, and timing might have been off. But it's an interesting science to how it all works and who makes it and who doesn't.
Yeah, definitely. Briefly getting back to, where the careers went after that initial start, I ended up parlaying that into nothing I got paid for. The first one was, eventually I earned a few dollars, but it was like, I don't know, at that time, this is gonna date myself, but that was like, minimum wage was like 3.35 an hour or something like that. But I ended up getting a much cooler vibe and music more to my liking when I got a chance to host the show at the local college station that was for Florida Institute of Technology. So it was WFIT, and it was student run, but you didn't have to be a student there to do a show.
Hmm.
If they liked you and you could prove to them that you should be on the air. And the experience that I had from the other place, which paid me minimal, but And the few times I had, I was able to land a show there, and it was much more of a cooler vibe for me at that point because it was music that I was more into at
So
that
how'd you hear
point.
about that job?
Um, I actually saw an ad in like a local paper
Hmm.
in, like a weekly flyer kind of paper that you can get free out of like a container on the side of the street,
Right.
and it just happened to have an ad in there that I guess the program director was able to either get it in there relatively cheap or free, and it basically said looking for an announcer, and then it mentioned WFIT to you, blah blah blah, and I actually had I was able to make what you do in the music radio business. If you're trying to move around, you do what's called an air check, and it's basically a tape of your work or your on-air work, you talking in and out of songs and all that kind of stuff. And usually it's basically a demo tape, and you give it and you send it around, and it's supposed to highlight your best stuff, and that's how you get judged. It's like if you're an actor, you go and do an audition. It's an audition, but it's an audio tape. And so I had one, and it was actually a reel to reel. I mean, this is like tiny reel to reel tape. This is before CDs, or, there was no MP3s. Like you can email all that stuff today. You either had CDs or I'm sorry, reel to reels or cassette tapes started to become the way you would do it. And that's what landed me that gig.
So
So,
when you put something like that together, what would be something that you want to send? Hey, coming up, the best
yeah,
hits
but
of.
we don't throw our voice like that,
Well,
you know.
that's my generic radio guy. Hey, coming up.
Hey, yeah. Boss jock. No, yeah, you would basically take the best stuff you had done when you would run an air checker yourself and tape your breaks. The cool thing is a lot of radio stations have what's set up is called a skimmer. So when the microphone is keyed, and I mean on the board, there's a audio board. When you key the mic on, it starts a tape machine running and it's recording what's on the air. So then you key that mic on as you're about to start talking. Then after you turn the mic off, the machine stops.
So how long
So
did you work there?
I think I did two, my senior year in high school and a freshman after my freshman year in college. I did another summer. That was the only summer that I actually still lived in Florida was after college in my freshman year. And after that, it was like, I want to make money. So I went to Long Island, and there was a good chance because I was out in the Hamptons of making a lot of money. I cut grass, worked for my uncle's landscaping business during the day, and I was a bartender bouncer at a place during the nights and the weekends.
So you were out of radio at that point, and then you had to
Well,
do
I wasn't out
radio
of
back.
radio when I went to college. I got involved with my college radio station
Huh.
when I could to start out. So I was doing that. So I wasn't out of it, but I obviously was not working at that local station anymore because I wasn't going to school
Right.
nearby. And I could only do that WFIT college station when I was home during that summer. And after that, I needed to make money because I did the show 2 days a week, and I was working for my father doing cutting grass and doing some other things, but I needed to, make some money. So, and he knew I wasn't
And
getting paid doing that. So that was kind of in his eyes, that was just fun.
right,
And he didn't have a problem with me doing it, but he also knew I couldn't do it every day and not make, money.
sure. Well,
So,
for me, after I worked in the mailroom, then I had an opportunity to leave A&M Records to work for an artist, and we'll talk about that story later. And then from working with that artist, I ended up going back to a different record company, and then from there to another record company, and then to another record company. But it was always, I was on the record company side of stuff, and I didn't really go into management or anything like that. I just basically stayed in the promotion world all these years.
so from the mailroom, you went right to promotion, right? With A&M.
Right.
When you
I
started in promotion, what was your first job? What was your title? What did you do?
I was
What was it?
assistant to the vice president of promotion, Rick Stone.
Oh,
And
okay.
I think what I learned from Rick was my work ethic because Rick would call everybody. and I would be the guy that placed the phone call, and he'd be on another call, and he'd tell me to call the next guy, and I would be lining up these phone calls, and you try keeping a radio person on the phone while Vic is talking to the other radio person, and he'd go call after call after call. So I would have to keep this guy interested and keep him on the line. So when Rick was off of the first phone call, I'd have the other guy lined up, and these guys would hang up. I'd have to go back and get them back on the phone. But he would call everybody. And
Well, it sounds like good experience. Like you learn how to keep the, I mean, let's face it, radio promotion guys are good at shoveling the BS. I mean, it's part of your job, and I don't say that to be mean, but you gotta keep people interested and keep your get them on for your boss,
I
who's
got to give him a good sales pitch.
yeah,
I have to convince you why you need to be playing this record and why the record will do well for you. And
yeah.
we've seen all those things about all excuses why not to play it.
And
You
well,
know,
back when you started, though, there wasn't the tools that are out there now. Now you get, we'll go through this as we get closer, but Mark well knows that you get a lot of programmers who, um, for various reasons, things happen, but, they can look up and see a lot of data points that weren't just available back in the day to everybody. You guys would get certain data points that radio would never see. And, vice versa, radio would tell you they're playing records,
I didn't know.
and there was nobody would know. They give you what we call the paper ad
Yeah,
because it was big and everybody wanted to work it. And they say, oh, yeah, we'll put it in, but they never really spun it. And there was no way for you to tell. But
now with
now,
technology, correct.
yeah. Now, because of technology, all those records are encoded, all those things are picked up digitally. So there's no lying anymore about how many times you're playing the record or if you're playing the record. As a matter of fact, now it becomes more of a like the radio promotion guys become spin police. And by that, I mean they're like, well, wait a minute. You told me you're going to play it 19 times, but I only see three spins here. What happened? You know?
Exactly. It's changed a lot since then because
Yeah.
back in the day, the radio station like yourself would just call into the trade and say, yeah, on number one song this week is Whitney Houston, and we're playing it in heavy with 35 spins a week. And then you used to have to ask them to report a hot report too. Because
Yeah.
if there was a tie for heavies or whatever, you would have to count up the hot reports, and that would determine if you were ahead of the other songs.
Yeah.
It was
Yeah.
interesting.
People always often ask me like, "Well, how did you keep track of what records you would play at what time?" Well, you have a printed music log, but I also, you worked at I worked at a station at one point where you had a printed commercial log and where it was going to go, but you had a file card box, and in that file card box was like a 45 sleeve with the name of the song and everything on it and color coded. And you basically took the one that was in front and then you played it and you had to write a time and a date next to it and then you put it in the back and you just kept moving them like that.
Right.
And that's basically how that came around. Um,
I'm sorry. You had a very important phone call coming through.
oh, we're doing a podcast here. Come on.
It's uh it's nothing important. But anyway, yes, I understand what you're saying. But that being said, I mean, the technology now compared to what you physically would have to do in the studio is that much different than what it is now. You had to do a lot of manual stuff, right? You had
You
to
did
switch
because
and test things.
you were playing records and then you were playing, either 45s or albums, but then it moved to carts and they basically looked like if everybody pretty much remembers what an 8 track looked like, unless they're too young to remember that. But if they looked like 8 tracks, although they weren't 8 tracks. So they held one song or one commercial or one piece of production and you played everything off of that and then they'd stack up and that's when you had more of the printed music log telling you which songs and the labels on there so you would pick them out and you would put them in and you'd play them in the carts and the cart sequenced from one to the next, especially the commercial ones. So my first setup was like there was 6 cart machines in front of you and 6 and 1
Hmm.
were always for music or promos only, and the middle ones were synced. So if you use 2, 3, or 4, they would just fire. The tone on that would fire the next one. but we didn't want that tone to fire the one for the music. They wanted the jock to do that so that you could be tight with it. But that's basically how that worked. And now everything's digital. Now everything's,
So
you don't
everything's on
even
the
spin a
computer chip.
record, you
It's
don't
all
pull a
done, right?
record, any of that stuff. It's all on computer, which is great technology until the computer's a
Yeah.
computer. If it blows up, then you're really dead in the water. And it makes you want to go back to having a cart or a real live record that you could just put on, because if the computer drops, that's it. You know, if the
But how
computer
about in the
fries.
movies? How about in the movies when you see the turntable and they actually have to line up
Yeah.
the record and
Yeah.
all
You
that?
put the,
You
you
got
put
to
the
do that
turn,
too?
yeah, put the record on the turntable, cue it up, and then there'll be automatic starts for it on the control board. And I was just having this conversation with somebody the other day about how we used to put phone calls on the air. You used to have reel to reel tape.
Right.
And when you picked up the phone, it would start the reel to reel tape. And then you would have to use a grease pencil and a razor blade,
Right.
literally a razor blade. And
Yeah.
you'd put it on the thing and you'd cut it and you'd splice it together. And it got pretty good at that. I mean, I could get just one single letter out of a piece of tape.
Wow.
But it takes a lot of practice and work on it. And then usually those tapes, they were pretty good sized reel to reels. After about 2 months, 3 months, they had a lot of edit tape on it. So you had to get the engineers to give you a new one because you just couldn't reuse them constantly, because
Now,
of different edit marks.
now, how about mistakes on the air? Like having the microphone on and cursing or saying something silly or
Well,
not
yeah,
knowing you're
this
on the air?
not me, but what happened once while I was on the air, I was working at a radio station. I did mornings up in Northwest New Jersey at WNNJ. And there was a, there was an FM station, then there was a booth, and there was an AM station on the other side. And the booth had the windows in it because the news people would go in there when they were doing a newscast on either the FM or the AM. And so when the newscaster was in there in the morning, while he was doing his news, which he could fire his actualities or the commercial set in between, he could fire that in there to that worked my studio. I just loaded the stuff in. But while he was doing that, I'd be pulling the next hour's worth of music or something and stacking it up and getting it ready. Well, he was supposed to turn his mic off after he was done. And I would always, as he wrapped up, pot him down and then start my next element. Well, he was kind of messing up as he was going through. And I grabbed some stuff and was putting it down and about to put my hand over and pull him down when he ended like 2 seconds earlier than normal. And all I heard was, Jesus effing blah, blah, blah. And he's screaming because he had messed up. And the mic was hot and it was still on. And I
Wow.
just did this like that, and he realized he would, and it was quite embarrassing. The phone rang quite a bit.
I was going to say that people
The
call up.
boss was not very happy because he heard it
Wow.
on the way in. So yeah, that kind of stuff can happen. It shouldn't happen, but it can happen.
How about ever being on the air and somebody coming in, or well, I guess it's all different now. Emergency that you have to cut into broadcast to say, God forbid, president or something like that
Oh, I
happening.
never had that, but I'll tell you what did happen a couple of times. By the way, you're listening to Two Guys and a Mic. It's Jim Ryan, Mark Rizzo. It's our new podcast. Like us, subscribe, ring the bell. We'll be putting up new ones each and every week. It's about music and more. So our time in the record and music and the record and radio business, basically. But getting back to your question about exactly what did you ask me just now?
Were you ever on the air when something like an emergency broke out or
No, no,
president
I never
called
was
you?
on the air when an emergency broke out. I was on the air twice when the station I was working for decided to flip formats
Right when
while
you're
I
on the
was
air?
on the air. That
Wow.
happened to be on Long Island, and it happened again one time when I was in Philadelphia. Literally, the program director walked in with the new consultant and handed me a CD saying, "This is going on next." And then I put it in. I started it. I couldn't believe what I was hearing, and then was told to come in and to a room where they were explaining to everybody that they were blowing up the format. The other time I was on the air and the station was on Long Island, and they had decided they were going to simulcast WNEW Rock out of New York City because this
And
was pretty far out eastern Long Island, and literally had 10 minutes notice before that was going to happen.
what happened? Everybody lost their jobs? Everybody went home?
Well, I finished out my shift for that day because I had to link up stuff and, but yeah, pretty much everybody lost their job.
Wow.
Um, Fortunately for me, I was doing part-time when I was on the Long Island station, and I was able to finagle that into more pretty quickly at another place. And then when I was in Philadelphia, um, the company that I worked for had another station that was a classic hits, and the PD and I got along very well, and he liked me on the air, and he needed a body, somebody to be his full-time swing guy, do weekend shifts, but also cover all the full-timers if they took days off or vacation. And they were switching to a new digital system and needed a lot of work to be done to convert the music over from CDs to this digital audio vault system. So it basically kept me employed for almost another year. Um, so that worked out that way. But it is kind
It,
of crazy. When I tell people that, they're like, "Really? You were on the air twice?" And yeah, twice that happened. It's rare that people have that happen to them once, let
that's
alone twice,
And how
but
did
it
those
did.
stations do when they changed the formats? Did they do well?
The one in, well, the one on Long Island eventually got sold. It was owned by Paul Simon's brother, Eddie.
Hmm.
And when I worked for it, and I believe, I don't know, it changed hands after that. NEW stopped simulcasting, and another station took up the simulcast. It might have been WLIR or somebody from Western Long Island started doing that. And I don't think it didn't really improve. It just gave them a bigger signal across the whole island, because it was on a different frequency. The one in Philadelphia, they decided they were going to do this. You remember back in I guess it would have been late 90s at that point. Yeah, late 90s. And they decided that Jammin' Oldies was the hot new
Hmm.
format, which was basically, as my wife Kathleen stated, it's like going to a wedding and hearing all the songs at a wedding that everybody dances and goes nuts to, but hear them on the radio.
Hey,
And
celebrate
people,
good times.
yeah, they thought because that soul sound of, Philadelphia, which had a lot of that successfully earlier, back in the 60s and 70s, they thought that would work. And for the first book, it worked really well. They had a really good number. The second book, it was slightly down. And by the third book, they were down less than what we had been prior to
Yeah,
that.
novelty was over. That was
The
done.
novelty was over. You're right. It was a format that only had about 130 records that you could really play, and it grew old very quick.
But I wanted
Um,
to add, for what you do, you generally have to have talent. You've got to be able to have that great speaking radio voice that you said is not how they sound. But in general, you have to have talent. You have to have personality that has to shine through, and you have to know what you're doing. And back in the day when you started, it sounded like you had a lot more spinning plates than I think people do now. And for what we did on our side, it was more like a salesman type job. You had to be personable in terms of the person you were trying to convince on the other line, either to buy a car or to play a record. And it's about a skill set that some other people may not be able to do because you're constantly told no, 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 no. You play a ballad, they want an up tempo. You work in an up tempo, they want a ballad. You work in a female, they want a male. I mean, it's always very few times when I look back on a promotional career that you have a record that is just everybody is in love with it, everybody likes it. There's always one guy that he doesn't like it. He's got to be the difficult guy. Well, if you got everybody else, you don't need me. I used to love that answer too. But
yeah.
I think what I wanted to summarize is that we're both in the business, but for what I would say the radio guys do, I think there's a whole different. You have to have a certain type of a talent. And I don't know in radio if that's even out there now, is so much of it is smothered. We don't want personality anymore. We just want you to play the records and don't talk and maybe talk a little bit. And then you got to put the advertising in there. But as you said, while we were growing in the business, there was personality. There was big personality. It was entertainment. And sadly, a lot of that is gone. And sadly, on our side of the fence, a lot of the promotion people are gone because the radio is somewhat declined in terms of the importance in trying to sell records. But these are all topics we'll get into. But as we
Wait,
start, it's just to have a background on how and what
Yeah.
I should say what you do and how you started and what I did and how I started. But it's we're on two different paths that eventually come together in what we do together.
Well, true, and it does come down to even on your side, you need some talent. You have to develop relationships and be very personable, and sometimes you have to work with people who you really would not have much to do with if it was just you meeting somebody and saying, "Hey, let's try being friends," but you just don't gel. But you have to work with these people because they're in your territory, right? You guys used to break up your territory whether
Right.
you were national or if you were a local, you were in charge of so many, and you have to have relationships or work on relationships with these folks. So that takes some talent. It is two guys and a mic, Jim Ryan and Mark Rizzo. Like us, subscribe, hit the bell, the normal stuff here on YouTube. And we'll keep these coming hopefully once a week, working on some cool prizes, working on special guests, and we'll get to that. And we'll cover a lot of different things, not just music. Mainly, it'll be music focused, but
And
we
more.
also we live lives. We happen to like a lot of the same sports teams, so that'll be interesting as we move along because our baseball team is not doing well right now, but hopefully, they'll turn it around. We're both Mets fans, which can be very hard to do year after
A
year.
whole life, a whole life.
Yes,
I used to wait for
yes.
them to be born as a Yankee fan. I mean, you just get into
No,
greatness.
don't go there. I can't
I
root for
know,
them.
but that was not my pattern in life. It's
No, I
the
can't root for them. I
years
can't
and
root for
years.
the Rangers. I can't root for
We'll
the
get into the Rangers.
Yankees.
I know.
I can't root for the Dallas Cowboys.
You
I
can't
just
root for the
can't do it.
Dodgers. We know you hate Los Angeles. We'll get into that.
Well, no, 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 no. I don't hate Los Angeles. I could never live in Los Angeles.
Okay.
Los Angeles for a couple days is fine, but it's just not my kind of thing. Like I could live there.
It's
Um,
tough. And
it
now with
takes forever to get
yeah,
anywhere. It's just, not my cup
it's
of tea to live there.
I don't have patience in driving there, in
Oh
there,
yeah.
living there. I remember being on, and they've got like 5 or 6 lane freeways, and they could be backed up. I remember
Yeah.
coming out of the show and being in 6 lanes of traffic at like 12:45. Where are these
Yeah.
people going?
I
Where?
love I love San Diego and I like Northern California. San Francisco used to be a lot nicer than it is now, but the wine country stuff. So it's not that I don't like California, just Los Angeles is not my
Right.
favorite place.
Well, I understand that. I always thought maybe I could live there, but knowing what I know now and knowing how out of hand things are financially, cost wise, I mean, $7 for gas, I don't think will go,
Yeah.
far, but it's crazy. I don't know how these people do it. I see these houses and these rents, and I know the rents are higher across the country, but I see houses that are like the minimum house is like $3 million, $2 million.
Yeah.
dollars. Who can do this? I don't know
I
what
mean,
they do.
we're both from the New York area, and now that city is going to bring in congestion pricing, and it's driving people nuts. I think they've suspended it for now, but
Right.
because it's an election year, so that's why it's suspended. It's only because they don't want to get tossed out of office. As soon as it's determined, they'll bring it right back in, and they claim they're going to grab all this money and it's going to improve the public transportation, but it won't. It'll be wasted like it usually is, and everybody will keep scratching their heads, and the cost of it will keep going up. I mean, it's pretty. When I tell people, well, I worked for Sirius XM for 22 years, right? And I used to live in Jersey, so I commuted into Manhattan every day, and the way I got there was on a bus, New Jersey Transit bus. Now they have trains or buses, but either way, I said it used to cost me about $5,500 a year just to go to work
Sure. I
in
used to ride
commuting
the
costs.
railroad.
You
Same
rode the
thing.
railroad. So you pay this money and you get a break on so much per month on the taxes. Not the you can take out money pre-tax, kind of like you put in your 401k pre-tax. You can take out so much money a month, but when
Right.
your bus or train ticket is more than, double the allowable amount, you're not really saving that much. You're just saving the taxes on it. But either so people would be like, "What? 6,000 $6,000 just to go to work?" I'm like, "Yeah,
So
that's how it was. That's how it
what
is."
what I could never understand is how the Long Island Railroad was able to get in the winter, the cars are very cold, and in the summer, very hot. Why can't we get the cars very warm in the winter and cold in the summer? They
It's
just could
called
never work that part out.
not taking care of the equipment.
That part they just couldn't figure out.
Yeah, I mean, it just seems crazy that weather seems to interrupt travel now more than it ever did years ago. Maybe I just didn't pay attention to it, but you ever notice like during the summer, it's not good to get on a flight anywhere in the afternoon because of thunderstorms? So
You know, and the short
even if
travel
you're
in the
gonna
morning.
yeah,
Yeah,
if you're gonna fly from New York, let's say to Florida, right? And there's no weather problems in either city. If your flight's at 2 o'clock in the or 3 o'clock in the afternoon, you may have problems because your plane is coming from a city where there's a lot of weather
exactly.
issues.
Yeah,
So, and so it's crazy that the weather seems to really ground these planes more than it ever did years ago, or maybe it's just that many more people are traveling via plane to when we were kids. Because I mean, going on a plane when I was a kid was a super treat. That was like, you were going on vacation or going somewhere. It wasn't, and it was much more travel on airplanes back then was a lot more comfortable and it was like luxury almost
right,
compared to
exactly.
now. It's more like a cattle call. How
Well,
many people can we shove in this tube?
well, before I worked at the record label, I worked at JFK. So I've got plenty of airline stories, and it was amazing what would go on back then. And this is obviously prior to 9/11, and some really good stories I could talk about life at JFK at American Airlines. But I rem- I'll tell you one quick story. I remember there was the flights from Los Angeles, speaking of Los Angeles, were always the nastiest flights. The people would come off the plane, maybe they were tired, it was a long flight, and a lot of them had money and they were, you know, I guess they were kind of uppity. And it was usually the last flight we had to work for the night because I think it would come in about 10 o'clock at night. I think it was Flight 40 on American Airlines. And I remember we were tired. We had been working since maybe 2 o'clock after school. I would work from 2 to like 11 or until the last flight came in. And I remember this one woman, she was very wealthy. She came off and she said she was coming to New York and she was going to a wedding and she had checked 11 bags and only
11
nine,
bags.
11 bags. And she said only nine of them came through. I said, well, nine out of 11 is pretty good. And she got so mad. But I figured, 9 out of 11 is pretty good. I used to
Hey,
see what the
lady.
guys used to do in baggage handling. I used to see what used to go on, and I used to wonder if any bags ever made it. Now, of course, we don't want to be sued by American Airlines, but it was interesting.
Allegedly. You saw them
Allegedly,
allegedly.
allegedly, I told her that maybe 9 out of 11 is pretty good, but she mad. And and prior to that, as I said, we'd see a lot of celebrities that would come off, and American Airlines would always have a lot of celebrities, and I got to meet a lot of people, probably more people in American Airlines than I met working at a record label, but it was interesting, very
And
interesting,
and back when you're talking, everybody and anybody could go right down to the gate,
right?
right?
To no security.
Yeah.
And I think we discussed this. Did I ask you to guess who the most popular person was that ever came off of an airline and people mobbed the person and it was through the roof?
Oh, you did ask me that, and I thought about it, and it
And you
was
had the
like,
answer. You had the answer.
yes, right. I remember saying it was. I took a guess. It was Muhammad Ali, right?
And that was absolutely right.
And the reason
It
I
was like
guessed
a
that
tie.
was because I'm reading the book that
We
Bill
spoke about
O'Reilly
that.
did
Yep.
about the killing of John Lennon,
I'm reading the
of
book as well. Yep.
John Lennon,
Amazing.
Elvis Presley, and Muhammad Ali.
Yep. And it was amazing because he was an idol. People were in tears.
Yeah.
I don't know where they came from. People, I don't know. I think they came out of the restaurants, they came out of the restrooms, they came out of the Hertz rent-a-car terminal. In a matter of minutes, there must have been like 300 people there.
Wow.
It was incredible. And he was very kind to everybody. I think
Yeah.
I got from him as well, but you just knew it was a whole different persona.
Did you ever have a celebrity who just was nasty from the get-go? Allegedly.
Our screen is frozen, or is it just on my side of it?
I think it's your side.
Oh, okay. Well, if you can see me, that's good.
Yeah.
Oh, yes. I mean, allegedly, I can tell you stories. I guess we can end it after this, but there was a television icon, very famous female, and she would drink quite a bit. Eventually, American Airlines banned her from flying on the plane because she refused at the time or insulted at the time. an African American flight attendant from serving her.
And who was this supposed celebrity?
I can't tell the name. I
You
don't do
can't.
so. No.
Can you
She's
describe this person more?
she had red hair.
Oh, okay. That won't be hard to figure out.
Yeah. Well, I hope you're recording
Interesting.
it on your end because it looks like mine is timed out. So are we still recording?
Yeah, we're recording. We're good.
Okay. I won't worry about mine then. As long as you can see and hear me, we're okay.
It's Two Guys and a Mic, episode 1. Look at this. We got it done. Two Guys and a Mic. Jim Ryan, Mark Rizzo. We will do music and more. And every week you'll be getting a new one here on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast. But please make sure to like, subscribe, ring the bell, everything you got to do. The more we get, the better off this will be. And it'll give Mark some more prize, to more cachet to up the prizes, basically.
And before we and that phone call was Stormy Daniels. She won't be joining us. So there you go.
Oh,
We tried.
you got to go back at that. Take another run.
Hey, I'm a promotion guy. We'll close it.
All right, Two Guys and a Mic here. And thank you for joining us for episode 1. More to come.
Thank you.